My name's Angilina Taylor. I'm the executive director of Aspen Strong. A little bit about Aspen Strong. We were founded in 2014 as a response to the high suicide rate in Pitkin County, which was actually born as a hike, and supporting the mental health fund, which is actually happening this weekend at Molly Gibson Park. So we would love to see some of you guys there. I'll put a little bit of information about that in the chat later. But really, we've grown into becoming a mental health advocacy nonprofit that is breaking stigmas through prevention resources, education, policy change, and community connection. So we're super excited to be partnering with the Times and Aspen Valley Hospital and Post Independent to be bringing this conversation today with our amazing panel members. And so I know Sam mentioned that QR code. There is a really great program that was made for tonight, and we will send that to you guys as a PDF as well. And that has a lot more about the panel members. And so I won't go into their full bios, but if you want to learn more about everyone, you can take a look at those. So I will just go ahead and do a quick intro. I guess panel members, if you guys could just maybe just raise your hand so people know who you are. And then we'll go into our questions. So Chelsea Carnoali is the Pitkin County Mental Health Analyst. Liz Bell is the Executive Director of the James Kirk Bernard Foundation. Kate Moyer is Behavioral Health Coordinator at Aspen Valley Hospital. Erin Garland is a Youth Life Coach and Director of the McBride Internship. And Kier Gallik is a banker at Timberline Bank, Aspen Strong board member, and person in recovery. So we have a series of questions planned today. Same as with Kevin, you guys can chat questions, put questions in the chat, and we'll catch those probably at the end, or maybe filter them in as we go. And we'll try and get to as many of your questions at the end as we can. So I will just go ahead and jump into it and start with you, Chelsea. So we're coming up on 2 years of living in a pandemic. How has it impacted our valley? And can you provide some recent statistics on our community mental health and well-being? And how is basically our overall mental health as a community?
Yes, great question, and one that we're all trying to figure out within our public health department as well. Unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of updated information locally about the effects and the kind of the aftermath of COVID taking its course. We have had some really great opportunities to collect information. Here locally, there was a spring survey done with some providers, therapeutic providers, that we got some responses from. And that really highlighted the need of addressing stress as the top concern. We also had mental health symptoms, like co-occurring mental health symptoms and isolation as high and exacerbated symptoms that we're seeing now into 2021. Importantly, I think we're really starting to pay extra attention to some of the different demographics in our valley as we are seeing more crisis and imperative attention that needs to be paid. For kids and families in particularly, the Children's Hospital of Colorado actually declared a state of emergency in May of 2021 due to the exponential rise of youth suicide attempts that they were seeing in their ER. We have not a lot of, as I said, updated information here locally, but I would love to share what we had learned in 2019 from a survey done in Aspen High School that gave some really helpful information about the mental health symptoms that we see in our kids before COVID hit and how we can all imagine that being exacerbated quite a bit since. So in that survey in 2019 for Aspen High School kiddos, we had 437 respondents, which was about 97% of the high school student population at the time. And of that number, we had 30.9 of the students report feeling sad or hopeless enough to halt their regular activity. We had 17.7 of the respondents report seriously considering suicide and 5.5 attempting. Also, 52% reported using alcohol in the past 30 days. So again, reminding ourselves that these were kind of a baseline that we're now needing to try to understand where we've gone from there. We also saw, as far as child safety and family dynamics, an interesting perspective from our child welfare department here in Pitkin. A typical year, if you would call it that, in 2019, saw about 215 referrals called into their department. 69 were called in 2020. So this really shows, I'm sure we can all assume and agree that this doesn't mean that everyone's family dynamics just were wonderful throughout 2020. Really, it kind of speaks to that lack of access and interaction that our kids, our teachers, our counselors, our coaches are used to having with the kids enough to start recognizing a need for help. Also diving a little bit more into demographic that we see as a minority and often overlooked, and that is our Hispanic population. We learned a lot from a grant and surveying opportunity through the county that was called Protect Our Neighbors. And what happened throughout this process is Hispanic community members from Aspen all the way to Parachute were actually, they were used one-on-one interviews. They had some focus groups and just like a basic survey needs assessment. And we were able to really see direct COVID impacts for this community specifically. That showed that 79% of those respondents reported a highly negative impact for their job security. 63% reported a high need for more financial security as a result of COVID. We had a tie at 59% for feelings of safety and connection to others. And then finally, 50% adult and child education, dramatic impact, and then mental health and well-being. Also focusing more and going back to what we learned about our kids' population from the Aspen High School 2019 survey. There were some shocking results that really spoke to higher mental health needs within our Hispanic kiddos in the Aspen High School and our female Hispanic population. So we actually had about 11% of our Hispanic male respondents say that they had skipped school in the past 30 days due to feeling unsafe. Furthermore, and warning, this might be triggering for some, our ninth grade Hispanic female population reported the highest incidence of rape. We had 15% of those kids report needing, we had 20% of those kids report skipping meals in the past 30 days because they did not have access to food. So I bring up these different demographics and talk about that comparison because yes, we have a major need to update this information. And in that updating information, I think it's really important that we recognize these bases of human need, those social determinants of health that we have not previously incorporated into our talks of mental health.
Thanks, Chelsea. Yeah, I think that kind of leads really well into my next question for you, kind of about gaps. And I know Pitkin County created your position, the mental health analyst, as they saw a need in the community. And what I really love about your position is that it's not just focusing on Pitkin County, but it's those who live and work and play in Pitkin County, which really encompasses the whole valley. And so what are some of those gaps in care that you've identified within our community, and how is your work helping to address, I know like some of those statistics can kind of feel so kind of heavy for people. So what's being done to address all of that?
Great question. Yes, that's what we're slowly discovering that as we chug along. One of the big things that we're focusing on right now is that updated information. Where have we not seen what we would like to? Where do we need to update to try to pay homage and really understand what's happened since COVID? And where do we just need more information? We have very, very little information valley-wide on our LGBTQ community members. Again, very little information that would be older adult and aging specific. Trying to learn a little bit more about these things as well, going back to those social determinants of health and how those are affecting our community members' access to care. Collecting that data will be a big win and really helpful in being able to identify gaps furthermore. We also did have a needs assessment and strategic planning that was done in 2019, which led to the hiring of my position. And during that time, there were some focus areas and gaps that were identified through community surveying, focus groups, and interviewing. So this was back in 2019 again. And at that time, lack of access to mental health resources was listed as a top priority. We also had co-occurring mental health disorders. So that's that stress and the anxiety and the isolation piling up together. We had big traumatic incidences that were really weighing on folks' mental health. So think of immigration concerns, violence, those things that tend to fit more in with our idea of what traumatic events look like. And then we have social isolation. Considering that these were our focus areas pre-COVID, you can all assume why it's important to try to get an update on that. And moving forward, we would like to best use our collaborative attempts, working with Aspen Strong, working with the other resources, the providers, the organizations that might not be providing direct mental health treatment, but are really relying on referring their clients to that for the betterment of their work, trying to see how we can collaborate as a community of providers and members to try to fill some of those gaps in a way that's regional and makes sense.
Awesome, thank you. Kate, I'm gonna go ahead and move to you. Can you talk a little bit, as Chelsea highlighted, a lot of people are struggling right now, and you've been on the front line of assisting families with their mental health needs. How does the hospital partner with local organizations to address mental health needs of our community? And how can we as community members help to minimize the people reaching crisis?
Yeah, I would just say as a hospital, we're so lucky to be able to have such supportive and caring community partners. Specifically, if someone is experiencing a psychiatric crisis at the hospital, we work in tandem with MindSprings, who come in and complete a full evaluation. And they really work to partner with the patient and their family to understand what's going on in order to connect people to care that's most appropriate for their situation. We also work to coordinate care with community organizations specific to what a patient's or their family's needs might be. And so that could be anything from detox services to home care to connecting someone with hospice. It really is specific to whatever it is they need support in. And going back to what Chelsea was saying, like the social determinants of health, that's really where we like to rely on collaborating with our community partners, especially public health, health and human services. So they have been instrumental in terms of our developing a safe and smooth transition of care for patients and family. I also think it's important to note that all of the resources that we use at the hospital are not dependent on someone physically being at the hospital. They are accessible to community members independent of us, which is really great to know. So one of the things that I would say for community members wanting to help mitigate risk or just keep informed, I mean, this event is a really great example of being able to have the opportunity to learn from Kevin Hines, but also from each other, and just keeping the conversation open as a tool for everyone. And then even getting more down to basic everyday interactions of just checking in on yourself, checking in on your neighbor. I mean, I know that's not hospital specific, but I think really focusing on tiny little moments that we have in terms of talking with each other can be hugely helpful in just trying to create some of those ripple effects that are really key to spreading awareness and knowledge about what it looks like maybe to not be okay, or what some of the signs and symptoms to look out for in your friends and family and community, so that ideally the goal being that we can prevent a crisis from happening and intervening in a way that doesn't have to be so urgent, ideally a bit more preventative in the care.
I love that. I mean, I think that we've been talking a lot at Aspen Strong about how mental health really kind of got catapulted into the front of people's minds through the pandemic, which was an unfortunate way for it to happen. But I think that so many more of us are sharing our stories and sharing what's actually going on with us, which I think in the long run, will help us all. I know we still have a ways to go, but I do think that it was maybe a win of COVID. So can you talk a little bit, now we're like in a different phase of the pandemic. There was reentry fatigue and fears, and kind of what you're seeing at the hospital from people that are coming in.
Yeah, I think that without oversimplifying this, that no matter what you're in the hospital for, that brings about a big change. So even if it is not COVID related and it's an injury or another type of illness, that's something that has its own aspects of stress without even going into the specific demographics or social determinants of health that could also layer on top of that and make it even more difficult depending on what the situation is. And then with the backbone or just baseline stressors of COVID adding on top of that, I think, we're just seeing that it's a really tough time, no matter what. And being in the hospital and recovering from something with the additional stressors of social isolation, with constantly adapting to change, I just think that does take a toll on you. And one of the things that we have started to implement is the zero suicide framework, which the goal is quite literally to have zero suicide. So that is something that we've brought in as of April to really provide, it's a pretty comprehensive framework, but it is training, it's tools, it's assessment, it's something that we hope will have ripple effects from the hospital to the community in making sure that we're providing comprehensive care to patients and families that are at risk.
I love that. And thank you for bringing up, that I think COVID's taking the front seat right now, but in life, we're all always going through things, and there's always something going on, and just having COVID kind of compounds it. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Liz, I wanted to talk to you a little bit. I know Kevin brought up the gut brain health, and I know that is your jam. We know that proper diet and sleep and exercise are important for our physical health, and there's tons of science that's coming out on the major importance of these factors for our mental health. Can you talk a bit about the research you're following at the James Kirk Bernard Foundation and this idea of the biology of mental health?
So first off, I think Kevin did a nice job of talking about his story, but I think the important thing for all of us to remember is that we are a human, a singular entity, and our brains and our bodies are very much interconnected. It's bidirectional. So what's happening in your body gives information to your brain. What's happening in your brain affects how your body works. And I thought it was funny that at the opening, she said those same three things: diet, exercise, and sleep. And those are also highly, highly influential in your mental health as well as physical health. And the most important one, I think, and it's funny, it's in Kevin's Art of Wellness presentation, his 10 little bits. It's number 4, but he says it's the number 1, and that's sleep. And I think so much of what has happened in COVID, so much of what happens in our lives is disruptive to sleep. Anytime we have any sort of pain, whether it's physical or psychological, when we're in the hospital, when we lose a job, sleep is something that goes away. And without consistent and regular sleep, literally our brains work differently, and our cognition changes, our problem solving ability, our resilience, our pain response. If you don't get enough sleep, you actually feel pain more intensely. And that plays in really significantly to everybody's mental health. And sleep is something that is often associated with almost all of the other suicide risk factors, whether it's mental illness or job loss or relationship crisis or any of those other things. Often there is a sleep loss. And that often is because of the stress response. And for some of us, that's chronic and ongoing. And for others, it is something acute and precipitous. But either way, it kicks us into a level of stress that we just may not be able to handle in the moment. And again, in his Art of Wellness, Kevin hits a lot of those theories, but I think we've mostly taken this idea that the only way to affect your mental health is through therapy, is through, somehow talking it out. And I think the important thing, the message I'd like to make is that in addition to therapy and relational kinds of things, how we treat our bodies, what we do day in and day out, the medications that we're on that can trigger depression or anxiety. We need to understand. Kevin talks about education and, educating yourself about the medication you're on or the physical issues that you have and side effects and those kinds of things is really important to mental health. And then the other two that he hits big time are exercise and moving your body. And that has to do with raising your heart rate, improving your oxygenation, literally your visual field, and, going outside and seeing things at a distance as well as close up in front of these Zooms and screens that we're spending all of our lives way more attached to, can change your mental health and how your brain is functioning. And diet, as he highlighted earlier, inflammatory diets are, increase your risk of depression and anxiety, and also reduce oftentimes your ability to sleep and your desire to exercise. So many of these things are interrelated. And oftentimes, if none of them are going well for you, it's hard to know where to start. And so, just taking small steps, go outside, walk for 5 minutes if you're not a usual outdoors person. I know here in the Valley, we have a lot of people who are often frequently and intensely outside. And the other issue we have here in the high country is we need to stay hydrated, and our brains only function as well as the cells that make them up. And so hydrating, diet, exercise, sleep, all of those things are important for, sort of keeping the gas going in our vehicles. And, as well as our bodies slow down, so can our brains. And that really can change how just everything hits when it lands mentally, emotionally.
Thanks. Yeah, I like that you're bringing up the multi-directional, like we need to think of our whole health management and not just kind of focusing on one area, but really kind of looking at it as a whole, and using therapy as a portion of it, and diet, exercise, sleep, all of those things kind of play into it. So another aspect of mental health research I know your foundation is interested in is how our environment can have an impact on our mental health. So can you talk a little bit about how this pertains to us living at a higher elevation where the air is thinner, and what we can do to combat the fact that we are living where the air is thinner? And I know you have a little bit of science behind that?
There aren't a lot of great answers on what to do about that, but there is some indication that potentially, you know, this thinner air and oxygenation is a risk factor for our mental health. One of the reasons for that potentially is that lower oxygenation can affect your sleep. Anybody who, you know, has spent some time down in the flatland and then come up here into the altitude may have noticed that as their adjustment period. And for some people that never really recovers fully. So just keeping an eye on that. I think it's something, you know, anybody who's had their finger in a pulse ox for a COVID scare, you know, just thinking of that chronically is an important thing to keep in mind. How do you get more oxygen into your body? Some of it has to do with how you breathe, and breathing deeply and holding deeper breath may make a difference. And what makes you breathe more deeply? Exercise. The other thing that helps to oxygenate you is hydration. So, you know, there's not a lot we can do to put more oxygen into the air, but how we respond to it may be important just in terms of, you know, really trying to get that sleep, get the hydration, eating healthfully. Another thing environmentally that can be a factor, and we don't necessarily always consider its mental health effects, is that suicide is often across the globe highest in the springtime. And there's a little bit of early research, no definitive answers, but the idea that allergies may play into your mental health. So again, I think, you know, one of the things that's important about Kevin's messaging is that those thoughts in your head are only thoughts and you don't have to act on them. And sometimes we might make an excuse or create our own answers as to why something is disturbing. And it may be inflammation that's from allergies that makes us feel lousy, but we think that this means that, you know, we're feeling mentally unwell, when really we're feeling mentally unwell because we're physically unwell. And so again, tuning in and taking stock when you're not feeling well of how's the rest of me is a really important thing to consider. And, you know, we don't have a ton of answers on that, but we need to keep looking at those questions and thinking about, you know, all the things that we're feeding our minds and our bodies are important.
Thanks. You know, in our valley and particularly, I know we have a high substance abuse rate here, and just kind of talking about what you put into your body and the effects that alcohol and drugs can have on you. Kier, I know, being a person in recovery, what would you say to somebody who's struggling right now, and what was kind of that turning point for you in taking the steps that you took?
Yeah, so excuse me, it's a good question. First of all, thank you guys for having me, and thanks to Kevin. This has all been great. So I guess the main thing that I would like to impart is that, you know, recovery really is possible. It seems like a daunting challenge at first, but people get sober, you know, all the time. It really is possible. And so if there's anyone out there struggling, or anyone who knows anyone out there struggling, I just think it's really important to recognize that. And again, looping back to kind of what Kevin said is, and something that I agree with, is that the first step there is reaching out for help. We've all gotten ourselves into a place, if you are in a place of drug addiction or, you know, alcoholism, you've gotten there by making the decisions that you've been making. The decisions that seem right and seem comfortable to you are what have gotten you there. And so I think the important thing that people need to recognize is that it's not that same thinking that's going to get you out. It's just not, it doesn't work that way. So the first thing that you need to do is reach out and say, okay, I know that there are other people who have been through this before me. Let's go see how they've done it. Let's go take their word and try to implement it. And so a lot of that starts to come back to setting your ego aside a little bit. And that can be something that's really difficult for people, especially in early recovery. I used to work at Jaywalker Lodge in Carbondale. It was sort of my fourth phase of treatment, as they call it, is working there. And so you see a lot of people come in with these really tightly held beliefs that they just are not going to let go of. They do not want to let go of them. And it's one of the most important things that you can do, is to say, okay, I don't know what I'm doing here. And maybe there are some people that do know better than me. And so that would be the advice I would give, is, reach out, set your prejudices aside, set your beliefs aside, and really truly believe that there is something out there that can help you. For me personally, I had gone through treatment, inpatient treatment for drugs and alcohol 4 times until I finally got it. Fingers crossed. I've been sober for almost 6 years now, and it can be like that. It can really take time. So if you're dealing with someone who's in active addiction or active alcoholism, I would just really encourage you that there's a fine line between enabling and supporting. I think that can be a really tricky thing to align to walk. But I would encourage you to not give up on them, and don't enable them, but also don't give up on them. So I could go on and on about, what I would suggest that people do, but I think those are the big things for me.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience at Jaywalker? I guess, like, what was it about it that provided the support that you needed in your recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. So I credit Jaywalker with a big portion of my success. I think it set me up really well to get where I am now. And a lot of it, though, I couldn't have done it just with Jaywalker on its own. A lot of people will go to treatment, they'll check out and say, okay, I've checked that box, now let's move on. Doing that doesn't necessarily really work for anyone. Kind of what you need beyond that inpatient treatment is an extended program of recovery and a regimen, if you will. So for me, that happens to be Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm a full-on believer and supporter of AA. I don't know how some of the clinicians feel out there about it, and I would be interested to know, but I know some of their thinking can be pretty antiquated, especially around women and God and that sort of thing. And it can be hard to fit it in a modern day box, but you can do it. And I have done it for myself, and I've seen lots of people do it. So I needed to plug that. I think that AA is one of the best, if not the best, long-term solutions for recovery. But getting back to Jaywalker, what it did for me, I think, was put me in a place where I was able to find a program of recovery in AA and outside of that. At Jaywalker, they're big on outdoor activities. They're big on reconnecting with nature, with excitement, and with friends and that sort of thing. And growing up in Montana, I had done a lot of that as a child. I'd skied, mountain biked, all that sort of thing. And so Jaywalker brought me back to those roots, and it really just provided me with a safe launch pad that I was able to use to start to direct myself in a better direction. So hopefully that makes sense. I know it was a little convoluted, but
yeah, no, that's great. And that kind of hit on my last question for you, which was kind of, like, if somebody were to look at your life now, it looks like you have it all. And you just really kind of hit on that it's like a process for you, that there's still things that you do to maintain, and AA is one of those things. Is there anything else that you do to help you stay grounded and in balance on a regular basis?
Definitely, 100%. It's been mentioned a couple times already. I think exercise is huge. It can't be overstated. I think that's especially in early recovery for me. That was something that probably saved me. Cardio, I think in particular, was great. It kind of got those endorphins going and gave me that runner's high, if you will, that I think really made a big difference in the beginning. A couple other things that I do, maybe not quite as consistently, but I strive to do is, I think meditation is a very useful tool. I think there's a lot of science coming out now that shows a lot of positive benefits from that, shrinking of the amygdala and that sort of thing, our fear response centers. That is pretty important, especially for someone in recovery, when you, especially very early on, you feel so vulnerable and frightened and anxious. I think any amygdala shrinkage you can get is well worth its weight in gold. And I'm also a big believer in therapy. A lot of people in AA kind of, I think, poo-poo that a little bit, but I personally don't. I think that as needed, I've used that many, many times in my recovery, especially when I'm facing a challenge that maybe isn't quite as well suited for AA. One of the modalities of therapy that I've found extremely helpful for me has been EMDR. I'm not one of these people who have a huge traumatic event in my life that plagued me, but I do think that I had some of those smaller traumas that I had accumulated over time, and working through some of that was, I'm not kidding, an absolute game changer for me. So I'm a big believer in EMDR. I still do it to this day. In fact, I have an appointment tomorrow. We're working through some stuff that I didn't even know was bothering me, and we kind of uncovered it with my therapist up here in Aspen. So big believer in that. I really support EMDR in therapy as well.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, if we could all have a little amygdala shrinkage.
You can quote me on that. Yep.
So we're going to shift to talk about our kids. Aaron, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. Chelsea brought up at the beginning some statistics about youth mental health, and the state of Colorado declaring a state of emergency for youth. And there's now funding that's being made available to pay for therapy sessions for youth. I know you do a lot of interaction with kids and all of your life coaching. So just curious kind of what you're seeing and as trends in the youth that you've been coaching in the last year and a half.
Yeah, you bet, Angelina. And listen, thanks. I just want to say how lucky I feel we are as a community to have so many, experts on board and professionals, willing to sort of fill the gaps where they're needed, where they're most, critical. And just sitting here listening to some of the stuff like that, what Chelsea shared with us at the beginning, I'm just sort of blown away by the fact that we actually have a community that is so sort of aware in, and again, it's us right now, and the real challenge is to spread that awareness throughout the community, to the lay people, to, just sort of moms and dads and kids in high school. But specifically about your question, what I'm seeing, I mean, there's no question that COVID has just sort of exacerbated that sense of isolation, right? And that there's so many kids who, for whom this period of life is, the relationships are probably the most important thing that they have going right now. And when their access to their friends is minimized, when you're looking at your friends from behind a mask and so forth, there's no question that has an impact. And I look at my role as a life coach for teenagers really as it's interesting what you said, Kier, about letting go of those beliefs. So much of what I do ends up addressing their belief system, right? Their, including, on a much more mundane level, obviously, than what you were talking about, but beliefs about homework, beliefs about attendance, beliefs about paying attention in class, beliefs about the important, their own ability to handle the struggle with their peers, in terms of difficult relationships and so forth. But the thing that Chelsea said about like 30% of the kids who have experienced some sort of form of sadness, and that was the baseline pre-COVID, it's a bit alarming. And I guess there's a part of me that that really is coming at the problem from a different angle, in the sense that I'm as a coach, I'm not dispensing advice. I'm asking questions, right? I'm helping the kids drill down deeper into their own thinking and come up with better solutions to the issues that they face. And I can give them tips, but I'm not here. My role is really to get them to solve their own problems, right, as much as they can. And so much of it involves just addressing their thinking or the thought patterns. And I started as a life coach really focusing a lot on executive function skills, and that's all really important. Getting a schedule and being organized and being able to plan and putting your life in order and staying on top of the important things is all really important. But the thing that I've discovered is that it's that's like 20% of the game. 80% of it is in their head. 80% of it is mental. And my hope is that by working with them, I can sort of help them take their school experience, their life experience to the next level, by being much more aware of how the mind works, being much more aware of the influence, like Liz was talking about, the connection between brain and body. And the importance of the things that everyone's been sharing for, exercise and just sort of being, more active and getting up and shaking out some of those hormones, the cortisol or whatever else that's stressing them out, at the end of the day, but being active and being engaged in something meaningful. And it really is, I mean, on the one hand, I do worry about, the statistics like 30% of the kids who are sort of experiencing sadness to some degree. Thankfully, I think it's not, it's definitely not clinical depression, but who knows where we are today. But I think that there's also reason for hope, in the sense that there are things that we can teach that, and I know that the schools are doing a much better job of that, that directly address that sense of isolation and, the loss of connection with their peers.
Yeah, I think, and you bring up a good point. Like, it's so tough to talk about, mental health and not go doom and gloom, and so I think it's so important for us to really emphasize all of the positive things about, like you were saying, about all of us being here and talking about it and sharing, and it doesn't have to always be doom and gloom, right? And so really, like, all of us kind of collectively thinking about it as a healthy tool for all of us to have, versus like this doom and gloom subject. So I guess, what are some of the positive things that you're seeing with some of the kids that you're teaching? I know that you teach life skills and resiliency. Like, what are some of the cool things that you've seen with some of the people that you've worked with?
Well, I mean, as you mentioned, I also teach, or as was mentioned in my bio, I also teach this life skills class at Jaywalker. And Kier, I'm sorry I missed you, but I came on board a little late. But it's I get really stoked when I see some of these guys who have, I think very much as Kier did, sort of know that they find that they're done. they got the message, and it is time to turn things around. And there's this willingness to do what Kier was talking about, let go of old beliefs and to just sort of open themselves up to, a new way of seeing and thinking about themselves and their role in the world. And when a young person has a sense of purpose or a drive or a vision of what they want, holy smokes, that really does alter I know it's altering the brain chemistry, because you just see it in their body language, you see it in their energy, and you see in their engagement in things, and their willingness to try new stuff and bounce back from setbacks and so on. I see a lot of hopeful stuff, and I love working with the guys at Jaywalker. But I also, in the high school setting, it's a little bit different, because they're, I work with a lot of high performing kids, but that doesn't mean that they aren't maxed out to, totally maxed out and just feeling a tremendous amount of stress. And so it's my role, I feel, is to point out to them as much as possible how much they already, how amazing they already are, right? That they are these phenomenal creatures and they've got tremendous potential, and that these setbacks, these, dealing with a bad grade, or dealing with a friend that didn't respond to a chat, a text, or not getting chosen for the team, or whatever, the various things that can happen in a teenager's life. Just helping them see that this is all part of the process is one of the things that I find, most, for me, it's probably the most inspiring part of the work.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess to that point, I had a question about what can we as parents do right now to support our children? Well,
that the big question, but thank you. It's a good one. I would say, one of the interesting things during the sort of the thick of it last year, when things were just so complex with, online and, classes and assignments and teachers using, all these different modalities or platforms that grades and informations and test feedback from their teachers and so forth, and just sort of keeping up with all of that. In the thick of it, there was often the inclination for a parent to do something punitive, because the work wasn't being done. They had, they were in their room for hours and hours every day and still, not completing a 20-minute homework assignment. And I was like, what's going on here? And some of the things that I encountered were parents were, the temptation was to take away the technology, right? It may sound a little counterintuitive, but from my perspective, that's not the first thing you want to do. My sense is that it is more because of the connection, because of and because of the isolation, I should say. It's more important for them to be able to have some form of connection with their friends. And if that's removed, it can create much. In my experience, it can just create much less cooperation with the parents when the kid feels that isolated. And I don't think that's a healthy place for them to be. So I would guess I would say that my first advice to parents would be, or recommendations anyway, every family is different for sure, but would be to consider, what can you do to make it more pleasurable to get their work done, or to get their homework handed in, or study for a test, or just attend the class and pay attention and so forth. Thankfully, I think a lot of the online stuff's behind us, but what can you do to sweeten it, rather than what can you do to make the pain or the punishment severe?
Awesome. I think one of the I'd heard a talk by Tina Payne Bryson during the pandemic, and I thought she said just allowing our kids the opportunity to be kids. And there was so much stress during the pandemic, and I thought that was just so insightful and so basic, but I think that that's really important for all of us to remember as like, gosh, they're kids.
Yeah.
Kids.
Absolutely. And the only thing I would add to that is that I think the most important thing at this point when there is some conflict with your child is the relationship. I think, and I would say put the relationship first, ahead of the grades, ahead of the other, areas of achievement. Make that the priority. And when you do that, I think then you then buy yourself a tremendous amount of leverage. And my tip for parents and kids in relationships is when you do want to talk to them, or when they have done something, commendable or whatever, make sure you point that out. And make sure there's, if it's time to sit down and have a chat, do it around food, right? Puts them in a better mood. And if you have the opportunity, take them to their favorite restaurant, I mean, these things actually make a big difference.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Does anybody in the audience have any questions they want to ping in? Sam, did you see anything come in from the audience?
Hi, I do have just one, which I believe goes all the way back to some of the data that Chelsea was sharing earlier. So from a viewer who said that she is an addictions professional and she sees co-occurring as including access to treatment and sober living with mental health care. Have you addressed this or attempted to measure this need?
So I want to make sure I understand that question correctly, and wanting to make sure that in addressing mental health, we're also including substance use disorders and the treatment of both of those in a way that coincides with one another.
Okay, so we'll see. I don't have clarification for that right now, but we'll see if she types in more clarification.
Okay.
And Angelina, other than that, we don't have anything from the audience. If anyone has something out there that we do have a couple of private message questions, and we'll get those answered by the professionals on the call. And definitely a couple of shout outs to Kier. We all think 6 years is amazing. So there's that. And we have a couple of shout outs in the Q&A as well.
Yeah, and everybody, Chelsea put the links to some of the resource guides that are also in the PDF that'll be handed out to you guys. So if you guys want to look at that, it's also in the chat. And I will put the link for the hike this weekend in the chat as well. It's just going to be a day to kind of celebrate community mental health. We will do a little hike we'll go up Smuggler. It's just a chance to kind of chat and talk. And then we'll have a hangout session with vendors and DJ Olivia and drinks and vendors and all that kind of stuff. It'll be kind of a fun day. And it's raising money for the Mental Health Fund and our work at Aspen Strong. So I guess I'll just close with, I really hope that you all were able to gain something useful from today and something that you can add to your emotional toolbox. And I'd invite you to think about how you as a community member can come together and support one another and allow each other some grace, not just now, but always. And at Aspen Strong, we say, if you have a brain, you have a mental health condition. And that just means like we're all going through something at some point. And so rather than going on that internal journey alone, that we call it the thought loop, where you ruminate over everything, share your story. It might just be what somebody else needs to hear. It always helps you. And now more than ever, like I said, I think it's so important to be giving our children some grace and be able to express what they're feeling right now. And I think it's our responsibility as parents to give them the opportunity to be kids. So I was going to do a little rapid fire with the panelists. So Chelsea, mental health to me is fill in the blank.
Oh gosh, that's really hard. I'm not particularly known for being concise. Mental health to me is feeling safe enough to pursue life.
Aaron, mental health to me is,
Yeah, that's thriving.
there you go. Liz, mental health to me is,
Connectedness by body, mind to people and life, world, nature, connectedness.
Kier, mental health to me is,
It's tough. I would say mental health to me means pushing my boundaries and doing things that scare me while remaining in a safe place and progressing as a person.
awesome. Kate, mental health to me is,
Curiosity.
I like
love
that.
it. And I'll just say mental health is health. So
Good.
thank you everyone for participating and being here. And I appreciate all of you so much.
Right. Thanks, Angelina.
Angelina.
Thanks, Samantha. Bye-bye.
Thank you to all of you.
Thank
Thank
you
you to
all.
our guests and our audience as well, and Angelina for facilitating. Be well, all of you. Good night.
Good night.